Maine, so, Ralph, are you going to the prom with our beauty queen? Cindy asked, and her entourage laughed nastily. Ralph, a tough guy, captain of the soccer team and Cindy's ex-boyfriend, blushed ear to ear and folded his arms across his chest in a protective gesture. He hated to be in this situation. In fact, at first it even seemed funny, but at some point it became something disgusting, like they were, well, about to kick a kitten. She does look like a kitten, thought Ralph, casting a seemingly indifferent glance at Katie, standing in a tight ring of classmates. Tall and thin, with a mop of curly brown hair, now wet from a bucket of dirty water that had been stolen from the janitor. She stood in the corner behind the school, where the two buildings joined in a shape, clutching a stack of textbooks to her chest and clearly regretting her daring, reckless act. But what she had really done was break one of the cardinal rules of this high school, which stated that you could never date the ex-boyfriends of the most popular girl in school, unless she gave you permission to do so. In fact, Cindy would never let someone like the scruffy and weirdo Katie get someone like Ralph, even if it had been 100 years since their breakup. Because, well, in Cindy's opinion, the universal injustice was already in the fact that Kathy breathed near her at all. Katie also dared to be the best student in her class, and she won competitions. She was a good student. She was never called to the principal's office for pranks because her reputation was crystal clear. And who would have thought that on the eve of prom, she would dare to send Ralph a note that said, "Would you like to be my prom date?" and drew a heart. The note was discovered by Ralph himself. He gave it to a buddy of his to read and laugh at. And the buddy tossed the hilarious piece of paper to another high schooler. And off it went. Well, what do you have to say for yourself? Cindy suddenly stopped smiling and everyone realized this was serious. What did you expect? Freak. Oh, please. Katie stood with her head down low, her hair covering her tear-stained face and her nose slippery with snot that she couldn't bear to wipe. I want to leave. Will you stop? Cindy's friend, Lily, who deep down sympathized with Katie, but never dared to stand up for her directly, of course, or she'd be rejected herself. Enough. Cindy feigned surprise and flapped her false eyelashes. I was just getting started, and in the next instant, all four of the boys, aside from Ralph, there were 3 other school bullies, the kind who get their high status by physical strength and insolence rather than intelligence, all witnessed Cindy kick the crutch that supported Kathy on her left side with her pink slipper. The girl shrieked quietly and just collapsed down, and this sight had a sobering effect on the sobering company of many parents and school staff. Everyone knew that Katie had a big problem walking or even standing. The exact diagnosis sounded terribly confusing even to adults, not to mention teenagers, but the gist of it was clear. The girl's body was afflicted with a rare disease that caused her left leg to weaken at any moment to the point where it could no longer hold her up. Sometimes Katie couldn't feel it for hours and couldn't even move her fingers. In fact, she sometimes had no leg at all, and what she had was as if it did not belong to her and was a useless mock-up of a human limb. Usually Katie felt the onset of attacks in advance and had time to sit down somewhere, and in case of a possible sharp exacerbation of the disease, there was this crutch so that she would not fall down somewhere, not crushed. But now it seemed the poor man had an attack, and everyone even knew what caused it. What's going on here? PE teacher Jim Smith knew that if this lot were together, no good would come of it. And now he'd spotted a body lying on the ground from afar. Let's go. Let's go. Me, shouted Archie, a boy with a paranormal sense of trouble, and was the first to run. But Ralph, thinking that a reprimand with a note in his file wouldn't do him any good when he tried to get into one of the elite Ivy League universities, took off even earlier, as soon as he saw the gym teacher on the horizon. We were just trying to help. When we saw her standing there, we thought we could help her get to the school bus stop, Cindy said sweetly, but Jim didn't fall for it because he knew she was incapable of sympathy and compassion. You know, I'm going to tell the principal about this. Get out of here, Jim shouted, and the rest of the boys went away. They weren't really ashamed or frightened, though. They were all used to trouble, and Cindy, well, she was used to getting away with it, thanks to the fact that she was a blonde beauty with 3 wins in various beauty contests. Her mom had taken her to since she was 10. You okay? Jim turned to Kathy, helping her up. I'll take you to the nurses' station. Oh, don't, she sighed. I have to go home. Of course you do. Jim shook his head. Is Mom picking you up today? No. Then I'll drive her, he said cheerfully and continued hurriedly to distract her. I heard about your zoology project. You know, the idea of talking about how real the legends about alligators in the sewers are is a godsend. Cindy says I belong in the sewers with the alligators. Katie grumbled and cringed because she had bruised her knee in the fall. Moo. Cindy's an empty-headed blonde. You're the smart one. If I were to compare you in 10 years' time, the difference would be enormous. I'm afraid, Mr. Smith. I'll be a loser in 10 years, Cindy grinned, and Jim gave himself a mental smack for saying that because he knew that Kathy's disease was progressing and threatening to spread to the rest of her body, not excluding her internal organs, which would mean certain death. They walked on in silence. In general, it was clearly against school rules to give rides to female students, but Jim didn't care about the rules right now. He couldn't stay away from the problems of this girl, who, by the way, was only 7 years younger than him. She was now 18 and he was 25. Thank you, Mr. Smith. I'll take it from here. The car pulled into the driveway in front of Katie's house, and she started to get out, awkwardly pulling on the doorknob. It's okay. The guy stepped out of the car and opened the door, handed him the crutch, gave him his hand as a support. And you can call me Jim for the umpteenth time, he smiled. I feel like 50 with that series. All the guys call you that, Katie objected. I don't think I'm special enough to make an exception. Okay, he sighed. As you like. As you like. Well then, until Monday? See you Monday. She sent him a half smile and walked as fast as she could toward home. The fact that her mom wouldn't pick her up after school today was a bad sign. A very bad sign. Ever since she stopped going to work, it had become a tradition on all days except, of course, weekends. Also, Katie knew for a fact, if Mom went to the machine, she definitely didn't touch the bottle that day. And the fact that she started satisfying her addictive need before the weekend was even over was a very bad sign. Closing the front door, the girl walked through the hallway and peeked into the living room. Well, that's right. Mom is sitting on the couch, around packages of chips, salted nuts and the like, and on the floor, a pile of bottles. The TV is yelling. There is a store at your home where they sell unnecessary nonsense, like frying pans resistant to burning and curing bad aura belts from the hair of Tibetan dogs. Sometimes my mom buys all that stuff, thinking that dinner was definitely not ready at this rate. Katie walked to her room. She threw her textbooks, notebooks, and pencil case on the table, threw her backpack off her shoulder, and went to the bathroom to get her knee treated. I also needed to wash my face. My nose was stuffy and nasty. Finished washing her face, Katie looked at herself in the mirror. How unbearable, unfair, impossible it was. After all, up until the age of 12, she had been a normal, healthy child, nothing to look forward to, and then the day her life had been turned upside down and shattered into a billion pieces. Katie had been at practice. She had dreamed of competing with the cheerleaders, and as Miss Alba's coach had said, she was doing well. She had every chance of becoming captain of the cheerleaders later. When she fell then, she thought she just stumbled. When she couldn't get up and her leg wouldn't listen, she thought she just hurt it. When the doctor said it was something special and dangerous, she thought they were wrong. Because even cancer is sometimes misdiagnosed. But the result was this: she was sick. And nothing could cure her, because science hadn't even gotten to the point of inventing a cure. There were, of course, opportunities to simply improve her condition slowly, as far as the progress of the disease allows. But this too, of course, cost a lot of money, and they in the family now even ordinary insurance no longer had. Their lives had been going downhill ever since the death of their stepfather. Of course, he was a difficult man, not a gift for the household, but as it turned out, he was the only one who kept Maggie, the mother, from letting her and her child's life go down. Sighing and returning to the room, the young girl with difficulty changed into her home clothes. Her leg was whimpering, but thank you, it seemed to obey and went to the kitchen. She wistfully remembered the meat stewed in cream sauce, which her stepfather served with green beans. He could cook as well as he could command and slap. Make. So macaroni and cheese, Katie stated aloud. sending the plastic tray of uncooked meat into the microwave. When everything was ready, she made herself some tea and, holding it all in one hand, went back inside. "Did you make dinner?" Maggie called out to her from the sofa. "You couldn't cook for your own mother?" "Oh, cook it yourself if you want," Katie said, slamming the door to her room. The door. Actually, she'd almost lived without it for a year. It was after her diagnosis, when Katie had become so desperate that she refused not only to go to school, but also to socialize with anyone, or even to get out of bed and brush her. "Here's the thing, young miss," her stepfather said to her one day, appearing in her room. Oscar stood in a peculiar way, feet shoulder-width apart, arms folded across his chest, eyes on Katie, veins swollen around his neck, saliva spurting from his mouth. "You'd think he had a group of recruits to chase, not a teenage step. I will not tolerate decadence in my house. Get up and get cleaned up now. Then breakfast and to the backyard to clean up the leaves." "No," mumbled young Katie, who, however, was very scared. She was hugging a toy plush giant bee and her tearful eyes were shining. "I'm sorry, sir, but I don't think I should listen to you. I'm going to die soon. You think you're weak?" Jumping up to his daughter's bedside, Oscar grabbed her sore leg and clenched her ankles so hard that the girl cried out in pain. You can feel. You didn't have your leg taken away from you, lost in a car accident. You have it and you will live. You will do everything a living person is supposed to do, okay? You're gonna live and you're gonna fight, okay? I'm not gonna let you just lie around like a slug and wait to die. Now go do what I tell you to do." He left the room at a brisk pace and Katie waddled to the door and slammed it shut. It must have been too loud because Oscar came back and silently, cold-bloodedly, took the door off its hinges. "I see, personal space and privacy is a privilege that goes to decent people by default. But young miss has yet to learn how to behave." Naturally, Katie was against it. She squealed and even stomped her feet. Then her left leg failed again and she fell. "I'm sorry," Michael said to her. He was Oscar's own son, and so after Oscar and Maggie married, he became Kathy's brother. "Hang in there, Kathy," he smiled. "I got my door back after 3 years. Just do what he says." "Dad," he paused for a moment, as if considering what to say. "He's not a bad man. He just has a complicated fate. It happens, but we don't have to follow in his footsteps." Maggie married Oscar when her daughter was 7 years old, and they met during the most difficult period of a single mother's life. When Maggie was forced to sell everything and move to a trailer park. Maggie was not a real American. Just in the mid-90s, she met a foreigner. His name was George Backer, and he was from the state of Oklahoma. At first, they corresponded and called each other a lot, and then George called Maggie over to his place. Maggie's parents, by the way, were against it. They were so scared to let their daughter go to a foreign country. "Who would want you there?" Expressed Maggie's mother, Kathy, in whose honor, by the way, and was named daughter. "You don't even have a normal profession. You didn't even graduate from vocational school and only sat at the market selling. Who's going to help you if something happens?" But Maggie was stubborn. She went away, got married, had a daughter, she got her citizenship, and then George died. And suddenly it turned out that he had been lying a lot, that he had all his money invested in some business that was about to start making huge profits. In fact, he owed everyone around him. And the creditors didn't care that his wife was destitute with a child in her arms. The house, the car, all the property went under the hammer. Maggie moved to a low-rent trailer park and got a job as a waitress in a diner. That's where she met Oscar one day. He came in strictly for breakfast and ordered their specialty and coffee. He categorically did not recognize sweets, but Maggie jokingly suggested him to always try their donuts, beak pie or cheesecake, word by word, and they got to talking. Oscar said he was a retired military man, that he left after being seriously concussed. He admitted that he had buried his wife many years ago, was raising a son, and that he was tired of loneliness, and so they got together. True, later it turned out that Oscar left the U.S. Army for a different reason. He was stealing from warehouses, for which he even served time in prison. But he thought he had been treated unfairly, and more than anything, Oscar dreamed that his son would continue his path to become a military man. That's why all the vacations Michael spent away from home, and at the age of 8 years went around the country in different summer camps, which Oscar also sometimes raised his hand at home, but he did not do it often and could so skillfully explain why allegedly beat that all even began to seem that he was right, and they deserved and themselves brought. The only one who rebelled against it was Michael. It was after Katie had gotten the door back to her room. The girl then went to a party at a friend's house without her stepfather's permission. And when she returned, he came down on her with fists, and then Michael for the first time gave his father back, but not for himself. "If you touch Kathy or Maggie again, you're finished," he said. And after that, Oscar never physically punished anyone again. Oscar died suddenly when Katie was 14, an acute heart attack. And that's when things got really bad. First, Maggie, no longer restrained by her husband, reached for the bottle again. She quit her job as a cashier in a supermarket and announced that she could live on her allowance, and she wasn't stupid enough to work for pennies. Secondly, and this was the worst of all, Michael left home. "It was my father's last request. He always wanted it for me." He explained his decision to Kathy, not looking her in the eye, as if he realized how bad it would be for her. She just nodded silently. Then she went to her room. Michael enlisted in the army. He decided to join the paratroopers and was going to reach great heights, fulfilling his father's dream, thus honoring his memory. And the days flew, the months flew. Time, as it seemed to Katie, stretched infinitely slowly, and at the same time flew too fast. After eating macaroni and cheese, Katie climbed into bed and began to scroll through the social media feeds on her phone. Here, instead of in the gray surrounding reality, she could observe a beautiful life. The young girl had already thought many times that if some otherworldly creature like those in horror movies came to her and offered to give her soul for the fulfillment of a wish, she would agree, just to become healthy. It seemed to Katie that this was the only thing keeping her from getting another beautiful life, to become rich, to wear fancy dresses, to marry a fancy guy. And so, well, what future is there for an invalid, and even one who has only a little bit left to live? The image in front of her eyes blurred. It was tears covering her eyes, and Katie, unable to stand it, hid the phone under the pillow, buried her face in it. How tired she was. The new day turned out to be gloomy, gray. But for some reason, this particular morning, in spite of what had happened to her at school the day before, Katie woke up in an unusually high spirits. And even her leg felt good this morning. It didn't whine, and she could stand on it almost solidly. That night, Katie had a strange dream. She was wandering through a vast meadow. The wind was making noise, bending the tall grasses like waves. The setting sun, crimson and gold, was blinding. Suddenly, Katie reached the end of the meadow, and there was a cliff, and below it, the surface of the dark, almost black sea. It was bubbling like molasses in a cauldron and troubled her soul. "Oh, hello," said Oscar, who had suddenly appeared to her. He was sitting on the edge of the cliff, unperturbed, calm, and he was staring off into the distance. Katie sat down beside him. "Oh, hi," she said. "I wish you hadn't left. It was better with you." "Oh, you can live well on your own," he replied. "You're a tough nut to crack." The girl shrugged her shoulders and began to twirl a blade of grass in her hands. "You know, I wish I'd never told you this. I never called you Daddy." "That's all right," Oscar answered. "I wasn't your real father, and I didn't take care of you enough, but without you, I'd be worse." Ow. Katie raised her finger. She had cut herself with a blade of grass, and now there was a drop on her index finger. "You must never forget that," Oscar said suddenly and sternly. He grabbed her wrist, a scalding, painful clench, and lifted her hand higher, examining the drop. "Don't forget who you really are. Do what you need to do, not what might feel right or what you might want to do." She was about to ask him to explain what he meant by that, but there came a strong, very strong gust of wind, and Katie felt herself losing her balance. With a shriek, she fell off the cliff. The sea, black, viscous as tar and bubbling with 1,000 bursting bubbles, was coming closer. Katie screamed in her sleep. She couldn't feel her arms, her legs, herself. And then she just woke, and this good, uplifted mood was surprising after such a strange, disturbing dream. The girl visited the bathroom, tidied herself up, and then slowly began to work on her room. to change the bedclothes, to sort things, what could be worn, and what should go to the laundry. I collected empty cookie wrappers, candy papers, soda cans. I'm such a pig. Katie shook her head. She went to get a bucket, rags, a brush, and a bottle of detergent. It must have taken an hour, but the room was finally shining. Of course, it would be nice to mop the floor, but she wasn't sure she could do that well. She went downstairs. "Oh, Mom." She called out to her parent, who was snoring on the couch. Taking the remote, Katie turned off the TV screen. "Mom, wake up." "Well," Maggie said, smacking her lips in her sleep. "What do you want? Why don't you let your mother sleep?" "It's morning. It's 10 o'clock in the morning." Katie smiled cautiously. "Why don't we have breakfast and go to the supermarket? It's Monday, and we're running out of everything." "Where do you want to go?" "Invalid," Maggie asked, her eyes wet and her lips trembling. "Oh, why are we in such misery, my daughter?" Katie dodged the hug. She had long been uncomfortable with her mother's physical intimacy, and she explained it to herself by the fact that the contrast was great. Well, what was the point of stroking her head if half an hour later her mother was yelling that she was tired of running and didn't bring her cramp pills when Katie, was lying on the bed and couldn't get up to get her medicine. However, she has already learned to keep all the necessary medications on hand. Maggie didn't take offense, though, because she had something else to do. Kneeling on the floor, she checked to see which bottles had any booze left in them, and then she greedily tipped the drops into herself. Katie grimaced in disgust. And this blurry, practically insane creature, her mother, she wasn't going to take it anymore. And she wasn't going to put up with being treated like an invalid. To think that this not old woman doesn't have any health problems. She could do so much for herself, for her family, but instead she prefers to sit in front of the TV, drinking beer or something stronger and grumbling about how bad life is. "I'd rather have no mother at all than this," thought Katie, and as quickly as her condition allowed, she shoveled out the rest of her cash. It was stored in a coffee can in the kitchen. Pulled coupons out of her desk drawer. She'd clipped them a few days ago. Checked through the lockers, almost all gone. Well, nothing. Katie counted the cash. There should be enough for the essentials, and then she closed her eyes and sighed. No, she wasn't going to the food bank just yet. It's not that bad for them. Leaving the house, the girl walked to the transportation stop. She was shaking a little. She rarely went out on her own. She was mostly only at school, and that was when her mom took her there and picked her up for shopping again with her mom. And I didn't always take her, and now to the supermarket. A few blocks away, how am I supposed to carry the groceries back? Still, Katie wasn't going to back down, and when the bus pulled up, she climbed on. The supermarket where her family used to buy everything, even when Oscar was alive, didn't have beautiful, professionally decorated displays of fruit, baked goods, and other things. Shopping space here was used as efficiently as possible, that is, cramped and many goods. Released at once huge packages, you had to pay almost $50 a year for the right to use the supermarket. But the discounts were amazing. After filling the cart, Katie got in line at the checkout counter. "Need some help, chick?" Suddenly, some African-American guy breathed in her ear. "I got a car, baby. I can give you a ride." "May, thanks, but I got it." Katie tried to be polite, but took a step aside because someone didn't seem to mind putting his hands on her hips. She laid everything out on the tape. The cashier called out the amount and Kathy, nervous, handed over the coupons. Would she have enough money with their discount? Turns out she didn't. "What are we cleaning?" the cashier asked lazily. "Here you go." Kathy pushed aside a jar of chocolate peanut butter and a bag of marshmallows. No treats. "I was dying to have some." "Hey, I'll pay you back." That guy showed up again. "No, don't. I'm fine," Katie protested. "Just get it over with, will you? There are people waiting here, actually." The woman at the back of the line was indignant. As it happened, the stranger paid for Katie before she could refuse the generous offer. They walked out of the supermarket together. He was carrying her bags, by the way. Thank you," she blushed. She'd never accepted alms from anyone in her life. Come on." The stranger winked. What's your name?" "My name is Wesley." "May, Katie." "Oh, nice to meet you. So, where are we going?" I'm gonna wait for the bus." "You're the kind of guy who doesn't trust guys my color." He raised his eyebrows, but it was clear he wasn't insulted. He was joking. No, I'm not. Katie flared up brighter than ever. It wasn't like the intrusive Wesley was radiating any kind of menace. He looked like a normal guy, but jeans so low-slung that it was a wonder how those pants hadn't fallen off yet. A t-shirt with a number, clearly expressing his commitment to some basketball team. A lot of chains and rings, a cap with a visor back and snow-white sneakers. Oh, it's just, I've never been helped like this before. And I have money. I'll pay you back. You can pay me back if you agree to go out with me, he blurted, and the next moment he was laughing. What a face you've got, Katie. I was just kidding. I have a girlfriend. Where did you end up? He asked, obviously referring to her crutch. Was it an accident? No, I had a terrible time explaining why every time. It's a disease. I've been like this for a long time. It's almost untreatable. Oh, I sympathize, Wesley nodded. But don't be sad. Science doesn't stand still, or not in my case. He said nothing. They approached his car. Oh, an Impala. Katie smiled. Cool, you know your cars. The new acquaintance grinned respectfully. Oh, my brother loves cars, collected miniature models of them. Your brother should have his ears twisted off for letting such a little girl go to the store alone. Or is he still a baby? Or he's an adult. He joined the army, Katie sighed. And there's no man left in the house? No, stepdad died a few years ago. It's just me and mom. And her, Katie wasn't used to complaining about life. She was ashamed of it, but then it hit her and she cried, spilled everything. That her mother was drinking and everything was getting worse. And that she has no idea how to go on living at all. What should she do after school with her illness? What are the prospects, except that she should probably move closer to the cemetery, which would be her home forever? Wesley listened attentively, without interrupting. Aloofly, Katie noticed that he drove the car very carefully. I could tell you to believe in the best and other nonsense, but I don't think I will. Life is a bitch sometimes. That's a fact. You don't know when it's going to be stroking you and when it's going to skin you. My whole family lived in a neighborhood where the police don't even go. My ancestor owned a house on the main street in the 30s. Then the crisis, all that stuff. Anyway, all that was left was Grandpa's stories about the good old life. Daddy left when we, his children, were just minnows. Mother was the only one to pull us along. My sister left home at 17 to go to university. She's smart. She said she'd get rich one day and get us out. Well, I didn't sit still either. I decided that one smart guy in the family was enough and went to work in the kitchen. My grandmother was a great cook. You can't take that away from her. She taught me everything. In general, somehow life slowly got better, and my mother worked in a hairdresser's shop, and there, a career goes slowly. If your hands are light and your imagination is good, in general, we thought life was smiling on us. Wesley was silent for a while, and then continued in a different voice. My little brother, Wesley, clenched the steering wheel of the Impala so hard that his knuckles turned white. That day he went outside to play with this, plastic gun. It was just a toy, and he was only 12. Damn it. He thought he was cool and he was gonna play cops and gangsters. And that's when, anyway, the real cops came to our neighborhood. They were catching some bad guys, and it just so happened that my brother caught their eye too. They thought the gun in his hand was... They ordered him to drop the gun and get on the ground. And he, well, what's a kid to do? He tried to tell them it was a toy. And then they shot him, Wesley finished in a hushed voice. They said in court that they had every reason to believe my brother was a real threat. What threat from a 12-year-old? He died on the spot, instantly. He didn't have time to realize anything. The municipality paid our family compensation. But will that bring my brother back? What does that have to do with money? And this is America's supposed justice and equality. I don't know how to go on sometimes. And then, a day goes by. So you're still alive, and the world hasn't stopped turning. The Impala pulled up in front of Katja's house. For some time, the driver and the passenger just sat in silence. Katie started, intending to express sympathy, but when she met Wesley's speaking gaze, she didn't say a word, as if he'd let the pain spill out. But now the doors holding her back were closed again. Thanks for helping me out. It's okay, the boy nodded. Take care of yourself, Katie. He helped her out and they exchanged phone numbers before leaving, and then he waved. You know, he smiled. Your real name is Catherine. Very pretty. The rest of the day was spent worrying. Katie tried to tidy up the house as much as her health would allow, and then even made a light dinner. Roasted a chicken and baked sweet potatoes to go with it, and opened a jar of canned eggplant for a side dish. Mom, shall we go to dinner? She called out, peering into the hall. Maggie didn't answer. She was absorbed in watching the quiz and commenting loudly on how idiotic the contestants were, trying to outdo them in giving answers to the host's questions, which, however, were almost all wrong. I guess it's hopeless, Katie thought. But on the other hand, couldn't she grab her mother by the scruff of the neck, yell at her, slap her on the cheek, and tell her to stop drinking and start living normally? There was only one man who could do that, Oscar. For all his faults, at least he wouldn't tolerate this kind of behavior, but Katie left some chicken and potatoes for her mom. She cleaned up a portion in a plastic container and put it in the refrigerator. Then the girl read for a while and finally went to bed. And the night passed surprisingly quietly, without dreams. Oh, Katie exclaimed the next morning when she woke up in a very unusual way because a huge dog's face was poking her. The natural human reaction would have been to freak out, but she just didn't have time to do that, because immediately a man who Katie didn't expect to see at all flew into the room. Luda, that's enough. Michael grabbed the dog by the collar and dragged it off the bed. The dog grunted good-naturedly and kept wagging his tail, eager to continue their acquaintance. I'm sorry, he smiled at his sister. You scared? Michael. Katie jumped up on the bed, her eyes wide. Michael, you're back. And as she was, she threw herself around his neck in her pink pajamas and shorts. It was a difficult maneuver because of her weak leg, and she would have fallen if Michael hadn't opened his arms in time. Whoa, that's the move. Michael laughed and hugged his little sister back, but Luna missed him, and she took advantage of that by jumping around, barking and wagging her tail more than ever. With Yem. But why are you here? What are you doing here? Katie was confused because she thought her brother must be at a camp somewhere in Hawaii right now, training for a future tough deployment. But here he was, and he wasn't even in his U.S. Army uniform, but in his regular clothes, jeans, a t-shirt, and well, I'm back, Michael hummed and scratched the back of his head, a gesture that always gave away his extreme excitement. I'm kind of not in the Army anymore. Where's Mom? I think she was going to get her allowance today. You know she doesn't trust bank cards and takes cash. Katie was glad Michael hadn't seen his stepmother yet, because he would have realized a lot of things from the way she looked. And he would have realized a lot of things from the look in the living room too. So what was the point of your leaving? Well, Michael sighed. In a nutshell, I kind of got kicked out. How is that possible? Oh, is it yours? Katie stroked the German shepherd behind her ears. It's mine. She'd lost her sense of smell, got sick, so she was no longer fit for duty. So I took her in. She's funny and smart. I remember last month, Michael George. Katie called her brother by his full name. Don't talk to me like that. What's wrong? Are you in some kind of trouble? He had to tell her everything. He could lie to anyone he wanted, but not his sister. Yeah, he got kicked out. But the whole thing could have been court-martialed. The thing was that in the training camp, Michael came across the fact that someone was stealing from the and he decided to bring the truth to the superiors. The bosses appreciated this impulse in a peculiar way, told to shut up because apparently was in the share. Then Michael threatened that he would go even higher, and then he is ugly. Dirty setup, a pile of parts. They organized it all so that it was he allegedly stole, but not from the warehouse already, and from the hospital. Very serious drugs. The case threatened to turn into really big trouble, but suddenly everything quieted down for some reason, and Michael was offered to get out of the U.S. Army at will. He was fine with that. He was told that in the future, it would be better for him not to stick his nose into any power structures. They would not let him build his career there. Oh, it didn't take much, Michael replied. And so he returned home, he added, having finished his story. Even before this incident, I began to realize that serving America is not my thing. It's just, my father wanted to achieve his dream through me. He believed that this was my path. And I joined the Army because I promised him But my father also taught me to be an honest man. He asked me not to repeat his mistakes, and in general, I would have betrayed his memory if I had stayed there, and even more so if I had shut up, as those types in the offices told me to. No, I left for good. I broke it off for good, except for her. He nodded at Luna, who was now lying at their feet, resting from her new experiences. The best thing that ever happened to me. So, I'm back, sis. Oh, that's good, Katie sniffled. I was so sick without you. Oh, mother's a freak, isn't she? Michael asked gloomily. She nodded. How's school going? Have you already chosen who you're going to the prom with? He jokingly poked her in the side with his finger. No one, Katie mumbled. I'm not going at all. Why not? Because, okay, Michael said, grabbing her chin and forcing her to look into his eyes. Tell me what happened while I was gone. They were like brother and sister, unable to lie to each other. So Katie told me how she'd risked inviting the coolest guy to the prom and what had happened. I'll kill you, Michael said darkly, and it was clear he wasn't kidding. Bury her, he added even more grimly, apparently already planning where and how deep to bury her. Oh, no. Katie was really scared. They're not worth it. Yeah? Some bastards are best put in their place in good time. I'll go to your school and please. His sister looked him in the eye. Don't do that. Don't. I don't want to be remembered at school as the girl who has a brother. Oh, okay, I give up. Michael held up his hands in a conciliatory manner. Then I'll just talk to the principal, okay? You may be an adult, but your interests at school should be represented by your family, not you alone. Okay, I think it's the principal's responsibility to make sure that his students don't do anything naughty. The front door slammed. Mom's back, Maggie said. Okay, I'm going to go say hello, Michael said. Then I've got some friends to visit, and I've got to take Luna to the vet because I think she's got a splinter in her paw. Anyway, I'll be home tonight. Okay? We'll talk some more, maybe order some sushi. Katie agreed to all of Michael's suggestions. She felt like there was hope in her life again with his arrival. If only, she thought, everything would be so easy. If only, she thought, one could just as suddenly, easily recover. Don't be a fool. Katie said to herself and then crawled back into bed. She didn't feel like doing anything at all tonight. The next few days went by surprisingly well. First, there was a serious conversation between Kathy's mother and Michael. She wasn't present, but she could hear the tense voices. Afterwards, Maggie silently and quickly cleaned up. Not only did she get rid of the bottles, but she cleaned all the dust and dirt out of there. And then she went out into the yard and started cleaning the windows outside. And what was especially good was that over these next few days, Katie didn't see her with bottles of alcohol. No, she wasn't naive enough to think that her mother was capable of giving up alcohol altogether. She was probably still drinking, but she was doing it in secret and in much smaller amounts, and she obviously didn't want Michael to notice. That's why she chewed mints all the time, by the way. But he, like Kathy, noticed everything. He just didn't say anything. It was like right now that was enough of a change for him. And secondly, when Katie returned to school, it was as if everyone there had forgotten about her shame and humiliation. There were no laughs in her back, no meaningful glances at her. In general, she became what she had been before in this educational institution, an invisible nerd. Only Ralph came up once and muttered, "I must apologize sincerely." It wasn't his style, but it was exactly the way the headmaster made students apologize, so Kathy suspected that Michael had been here. It's forgotten, Katie sighed, hurrying past Ralph. It's just, you're a good girl, he added, and she stopped, shyly looking over his shoulder. It was strange, but right now in those words, she knew he meant it. But you shouldn't be looking for something that's not your level. I'm just wishing you well. Ralph may have meant well, but it came out kind of pejorative. You're such an asshole. Kathy snorted. Anyway, since Michael's return, life seemed to have gone back to normal. Luna made a difference. She was obedient, intelligent, an army dog, after all. But at the same time, a mischievous, restless person who seemed to realize that now I had a civilian life and could go a little crazy. She used to come into Katya's room in the evenings and took a place to sleep at the foot of her bed. The girl didn't mind. Yes, Katie answered the phone from Wesley's number, but the voice on the other end was not his. "Oh, hi, I'm Wesley's sister, Anne." It came out on the other end, and Katie was, "Well, hi. Nice to meet you," she said, not understanding why the sister of her new acquaintance was calling her. A thought crossed her mind. What if he was in the hospital? But Anne suddenly started talking about what Wesley had told her about Katie, about her specific illness, and they should meet. Oh, but why? The girl was completely confused. "Not a phone conversation," Anne said insistently. "But believe me, it's very important. Can we see you tonight? Do you know Zach's Pizza? Wesley and I will meet you there at 7. "Okay," Katie said yes. It was very strange. She was about to tell Michael about it, but then she changed her mind. She didn't want to burden him with her own problems, she thought. He should be dealing with his own life right now. Just yesterday, she'd seen college brochures in his hands, so he was thinking about his future. And even if it was hopeless, Michael had his whole life ahead of him. Wesley's sister was the exact opposite of him. No, she was tall and thin, and even her facial features were similar, but still, they were different. Wesley backed up his words, many of which, by the way, were slang with violent gesticulation. Anne's speech was measured and precise, aesthetic, as if she were a TV news anchor. Wesley was dressed like a stereotypical boy from a poor neighborhood, as they were portrayed in the movies of the 90s. Anne was wearing a sky blue double-skirt suit, a snow-white silk blouse, and a string of pearls around her neck, and her hair, probably curly by nature, like her brother's, was straightened and flowed like silk. "So, what did you want to talk about?" Katie asked as they placed their order. "Oh, I'm a scientist," Anne began. "I work for a private company." From the story, it seemed that this company was developing unique, marketable drugs for serious diseases, such as mobility, premature aging, and more. "Now I'm working on a project, we call it Hydra," Anne said and glanced at her brother. "Actually, I said it was a bad idea from the beginning, but Wesley told me about you and I." "Okay." Anne tapped her hands lightly on the table. "I'll probably regret it 1,000 times, but so be it." And what she said next sounded like complete fiction to Katja. It turned out that Hydra was a project in which a group of scientists, together with Anne, were creating innovative drugs that could almost instantly correct the human genome. And therein lay the catch. It took a long time to bring something like this to market, but that wasn't even the problem. The problem was a series of laws that severely restricted what scientists could do, and so the owners of Hydra decided it wasn't profitable for the US. They were going to shut it down altogether, and naturally, in this case, Anne and the other scientists would lose all their work and any rights to create parts of the project. "I didn't come to work to have all our hard work thrown down the drain," she sighed. "There's a chance that Hydra will stall, that the project will never be revived. In fact, it could be continued, but it's too expensive. It's too complicated. We're now working on being allowed to take some of our data so that we can move it to other projects. You know, we've already started testing some drugs." But Anne hesitated. "On animals, worms, and we've come to the conclusion that it really works. But our owners, those cretins, decided that since the project couldn't make a proper profit, since it would take years to get it to market, they'd rather destroy the whole thing than let anyone benefit from it. And then Wesley tells me that there's a chance, that there's a man who's sick and willing to do anything." Katie didn't say a word. The pizza she'd brought was getting cold. Well, almost. Wesley was eating a slice. "What?" The guy looked at his sister and Katie. "Isn't that cool? You can get healthy." "Oh, he wouldn't have gotten off me alive," Anne said. "If I hadn't said yes." "Idite, I mean. You say there's a cure? But would it be an experiment?" That's right." Anne nodded and sighed. "No guarantees. Extreme risks. It's illegal. If something goes wrong, I'll deny everything, understand? Otherwise, I'll go to jail. And naturally, my career will be ruined. But it's a chance. Theoretically, you can become healthy, but you have to make a decision quickly," Anne added, tapping her fingertips on the table. "The owners are making a fuss. I'm afraid they want to close the project as soon as possible. They seem to have mishandled some of the permits and are afraid of the consequences. Time is short." "I feel like an idiot," Wesley admitted. But Katie, when I met you, I realized Don't take me for a crazy person, okay? But I thought you were an amazing girl. And when you said that not only does it make you like that, but it could kill you, I remembered that Anne has the ability to, a theoretical. His sister interrupted him sternly. So, if you say no, you definitely have a chance to live a few more years. And we don't know what happens after the drug is administered to a person. One thing I can say for sure, the consequences will be irreversible. It was as if Kathy had been mystically thrown into the ocean, outer space, or onto the cliff of the world's tallest mountain. She felt more lost than ever, terrified and amazed at the same time. She didn't know what to think, and yet her whole being was rushing toward the opportunity. Risk? Yes. Probable death? Yes. But the doctors were ruthless in their prognosis. A rapid loss of mobility for the left leg, then the same for the left arm, and then gradual, as one of them said, hardening of the body, and as a result, several months of existence on artificial life support, for the sake of which, by the way, her relatives, her mother and Michael, will have to sell everything and become paupers. Is she ready for this? Will she be able to go quietly, in agony, knowing that she missed a chance, albeit one in a million? In principle, you can think about it for a couple of days. Anne began. I agree. Kathy interrupted her. When? Good girl. Wesley reached out his hand and put his palm over her trembling cold fingers. Don't worry, we'll take care of everything. Just trust us. That same evening, Kathy photographed and sent Anne all her medical records. Statements from clinics, hospitals, all in all, just a mountain of paperwork that told of her illness from the moment it was discovered. And after she was done with that, the girl's hands were shaking. Calm down. She tried to practice conscious, deep, measured breathing. Everything's going to be all right. And then she broke into a nervous laugh. Who am I kidding? Everything could be. Even worse. And as if to confirm this, in Katya's room suddenly knocked her mother. In general, it was surprising, because for the past year, the cases when she wanted to talk to her daughter about something on the fingers could be counted. Right now, though, her mom looked unusually disheveled or something. Concerned? Oh, daughter, can I talk to you? She asked, and smiled ingratiatingly. Yes, of course, come in, Katie said. Luna, yuck. She snapped at the dog when it growled low. Yes, Maggie didn't like her from the start, and unlike the household, the sheepdog didn't have the intelligence or tact to hide it. However, thought Katie, maybe it was the other way around, and Luna had more courage than they did, because she was just too shy to express her dislike openly, because it was her mother. And Michael, too, was probably doing his best to be polite to his step. Maggie, sitting on the edge of the bed, talked about how hard their lives were, how hard it was to get a job at her age and condition. Then Kathy swallowed a very realistic remark that some people were still drinking, and if that condition were removed, there would be plenty of work. And so, of course, who needs a drunk? What? $8,000? Katie was so immersed in her worries after the meeting with Wesley and his sister that she didn't get the shocking news that her mother had taken out a loan because she had bought some supposed Indian amulet charged with energy to cleanse her body of the effects of alcohol. But for some reason, it didn't help, and it was impossible to return it with a refund. Mom, how could you think of that? The girl exclaimed indignantly. With this money, you could pay for a course in a rehabilitation clinic to be treated like the dregs of society. Maggie pressed her lips together. No, clinics, all those clinics, they're for real alcoholics, and I'm not one of them. Mom, I just lost my husband, and I have a handicapped daughter. Maggie's already shrieking. And a stepson? Shame on you. You could have served and provided for your family. No, don't touch Michael, Mom. Katie could no longer hide the disgust in her tone. His life is none of your business. I raised him, and now you're the one embarrassing him. We live in his father's house, and you've turned it into a pigsty. You think I'm proud to be his mother? I'm ashamed to look in people's eyes when you drove me to and from school. I can see from you what you are, what you have become. She finished in despair and quieter. What happened to you, Mom? Why did you become like this? Maggie gave Katie a piercing, unkind, insulted look. Then she got up and walked out. Well, at least I'm not defective. And she walked out, and Katie wept bitterly. Although for a long time the quarrels with her mother could not squeeze out of her pure, sincere resentment, and if they caused tears, then rather tired of the situation in general. That evening her mother sat in front of the television again, while Katie, Michael, and Luna went out to the backyard. Michael had made cocoa for his little sister, and while she drank it sitting in the rocking chair, he showed her what commands Luna knew and told her all sorts of funny stories from the service. Later in the night, when Kathy was already in bed, she was awakened by an incoming message. It was Anne. Tomorrow, Wesley will pick you up at 1 o'clock in the morning. Not a word to anyone. The girl sat up on the bed. Immediately hot, she trembled with excitement. Tomorrow. I mean, that's already practically, in fact, today. Could it really be? Could it really happen so soon? And the next day flew by like a dream. And then she was glad that Luna had gone to sleep in Michael's room tonight. It would have been unthinkable to leave the house unnoticed with such a faithful guardian. Katie got ready, barely getting into things and nearly falling twice. Then, feeling more awkward and noisy than ever, she left the house. Wesley's car was parked in the driveway. He came out to meet her and they had a few words, then got into the car. Worried? He asked, pulling into the driveway. What do you think? Oh, I'd shit myself with fear, he said quite seriously, and they drove on in silence. The laboratory was located on the outskirts of the city, in an unremarkable building of 2 floors, but surrounded by a fence and with a checkpoint. The guard owes me, so I have the access codes. Wesley waved a card in the air, which he used to open the gate. Oh, it's kind of dark in here. Katie shared her first impression. It was the city morgue in the 80s, Wesley said. They hope that's not a reason for you to run away. There are no ghosts here. He awkwardly tried joking, obviously to somehow distract Katie from her excitement about what was to come. Well, except for the ghosts of worms killed in the name of science. Oh, very funny. Anne chided her brother, who had come out of the building to greet them. Are you ready? She asked Katia, who, as soon as she got out of the car, felt just a wave of chills, and at first she thought it was a gust of wind, but then she realized that it was her own nervous tension sending signals through her body. It's hard to be ready for things. I want this, and I simultaneously want to be far away from here. We'll see. Honest and best, the right answer. Anne smiled. Coming through. So, Wesley, don't touch anything? I got it. The boy defiantly hid his hands in his pockets. Anne was about to close the door. But then, we seem to have a problem, she said as she saw a tall figure approaching them. Michael, Katie exclaimed. Why didn't you close the gate when you drove in? This is a secret facility, by the way. Anne was indignant. I did. Wesley waved his arms. I swear I drove in and closed it right away. What don't I understand? Hi, Michael said as he approached. I think I need to explain myself. Were you following me? Katie asked, and he told her everything. In a few sentences, he outlined that she had left her smartphone on the kitchen table, and there was a voicemail from Wesley saying, "Meet me tonight. I'll pick you up, baby." And naturally, Michael, as the big brother, couldn't stay away. And in fact, he should have come directly and talked. But yes, he admitted, it was disgusting. But took her smartphone and began to read all the correspondence. And that's how Michael found out about everything, about Katie being propositioned. Okay, hold on, dude. Now it was Wesley's turn to be amazed. So, while I got out of the car to talk to Kathy and check if I had a flat tire, you somehow managed to get into the back seat and hide there. How is that even possible? Well, I have some skills at camouflage, Michael coughed. Anyway, if you think I'm going to let my sister, you stop, and pointed her index finger at him. Your sister is an adult. She has the right to take a risk if it will save her life. And you don't dare any P2-incher who says I'm against it, Michael shrugged. But be warned, I will not leave her side and I will control her. Or, do you have a doctorate? Anne gave him a sneering look. Oh, no, Michael held her gaze fearlessly. But I'll figure it out as I go along. Anne said nothing. She gave a meaningful smirk, and finally, the little group entered the building. It looks like the set of a movie about mad scientists. Michael said as they walked down the whitewashed corridors past laboratories and other rooms hidden behind walls of heavy-duty glass. Anne gave him a searing glare for the comment. For the umpteenth, "We're here," she said, ushering her companions into another room with a bright light. "Strip down to your waist and lie face down here." She pointed to a metal table. "Okay." Katie looked incredulously at the scientific bed. "Why are there straps all around the edges? Don't tell me you're already imagining horror stories." Anne rolled her eyes. "We're working not only on what you're supposed to have, but also on many other drugs. In particular, creating a drug against epilepsy. We've reached the point of testing it on volunteers. That's what the harness is for, to prevent injuries and falls. But since we don't know what the drug will do, I'd buckle you up too, just in case. Don't even think about it." Michael stood up for his sister. "It's going to be okay, Katie." "Oh, I'm fine." She smiled and pulled off her sweater. "Will you turn away?" Michael and Wesley turned away. "It's okay," Anne said, and when they turned around, they saw Kathy already face down. Her back was covered by a white material with a square slit that exposed her lower back and gave access to her lumbar spine. "Oh, I'm not looking again." Wesley exhaled, noticing some device in his sister's hands that looked like a prop from a space fiction movie. "I'm afraid of needles." "Oh, I'm here, baby." Michael squeezed his sister's sweaty palm. "Will it hurt her?" "No," Anne answered. Anesthesia is of the highest class, not even in any clinic in the world." "How much longer?" Kathy asked after a few minutes. The sensation in her back was more unpleasant than painful. "Actually, that's all. But you'd better lie down a little longer." Anne walked around the table and looked into her face. "You're a good girl. Did you think it would be longer and worse because of some scientific invention?" "Sort of." Katie smiled weakly. She suddenly felt so, like she was sleepy and weightless at the same time. "Eh? Isn't there supposed to be rounds in the middle of the night?" Wesley asked suddenly. The guy was pointing his finger at one of the screens, which showed the building from various angles inside, and right now there were several people walking down the inner corridor. Some gray-haired man in a suit, surrounded by 4 guys in black security uniforms, and they were obviously armed. "What?" Anne flew up to her brother and stared at the image. Her face contorted. "Eric Franz. What the hell is he doing here?" "Oh, who's Eric Franz?" Michael asked. "Oh, we're in deep shit, aren't we?" Wesley asked. No. Anne fumbled. "Eric Franz is our big boss, the head of the board of directors, and he can't know what we're doing here. He's not even supposed to be here. He's off to Monaco for the weekend, isn't he?" Anne approached Katie. "Hey, baby, I'm afraid I've let you down. I had hoped to do some tests in a couple of hours, get some tests and do some examinations to see how the drug was working in your system. But I'm afraid. Now we have to leave." "Oh, can't your boss get on board with this?" Wesley waved his hands. What do you mean?" "What do you mean?" Michael frowned. "Hey, that wasn't the deal. My sister can't just leave like that. You said it yourself, that this medicine of yours could do anything. It could kill her if we stay," Anne said, hastily cleaning up and disposing of her lab work. "There's 1,000% chance he'll—" She didn't have time to finish, because at that moment the lights in the room suddenly went out and then came back on. But now they were red and blinking alarmingly to a mechanical voice announcing unauthorized entry and unauthorized use of lab set. "Damn it." Anne exhaled, and the next moment the door opened and a gray-haired gentleman in a business suit and 2 guards appeared on the threshold, pointing guns at the small group. Katie had barely managed to get down from the table and pull on her sweater. She was wobbly and floating, everything was spinning and seemed unreal. Michael supported her, hugging her and pulling her against him in a protective gesture, wanting to shield his little sister from the world. "I'm afraid I have to apologize for the sudden intrusion." Eric Franz smiled, and at this time it might have seemed that he was just an elegant, rich, and polite old man scientist. But since this is all, he looked around the room. "Belongs to me. Then I think I'm forgiven some lack of good manners. Oh, I can explain everything." Anne exclaimed. "You can?" "Well, I don't doubt it, my dear," said the old gentleman with a new smile. "Do you think that I don't take any interest in the affairs of my employees?" he asked. "What do you think? Is it possible to keep my business confidential if you don't keep an eye on everyone and everything? If you don't know not only what your people do at work, but also what they do outside of work? Would you have no idea, shall we say, of how they breathe? All of your messages, sweet Anne, I got all of them. And, the fact that you've decided to, shall we, betray me after all I've done for you, after all I've contributed to your career, Anne, how ungracious. I didn't betray you. The young woman lifted her chin. You're the one who decided to undo everything we've worked for. You decided to. Actually, you knew that I would have the final say in everything when you signed the employment contract. And Mr. Franz shook his head and clucked his tongue as if he were explaining the obvious to an unintelligent child. But back to the point, dearie. I admit that your impulse, your desire to save the poor child. At these words, Mr. Franz shifted his gaze to Katie. I was touched. I think it could make a great story, perhaps even a good ending. After all, there is indeed a possibility that the drug, theoretically, could have overcome Catherine's illness. But I've already made my decision. Project Hydra will be terminated. The process has already begun, which means none of this is possible. Look, Michael decided to intervene. If we need to sign some non-disclosure papers, we'll do it. But Anne has already injected my sister with the drug. It's done. And unless you have the means to reverse the process, then my sister can actually get healthy. There's no way around it. I realize well, that we have unwittingly become accomplices. But I can promise you that for me and Katie, enough, young man. Eric Franz raised his hand. We talked to you, but no. And yes, you're right. The process cannot be reversed. But as I said, everything you've done here and everything you can say doesn't matter anymore. What do you mean? Katie whispered confusedly. I don't understand. The process is underway, and repeated the big boss's words tensely. What do you mean by that? Only that the Hydra project will be liquidated. Said the old man, and now he was no longer smiling, but his gaze radiated absolute ruthlessness. And I think right now, by conscience and moral law, I have to be honest with you, there have been purges in the homes of company employees. All material that could lead to me and my companies has been destroyed. The most intractable, I'll put it this way. My people have found an approach to them, and they won't tell anyone or anything. But this, he circled the room with his hand. All this, there is no way around it without complete, so to speak, removal of everything that can be used in any way, say, against me. You should know one more thing. At one time, the electronic security system here was finalized in a specific way, and right now. With these words, Eric Franz took out a smartphone from his pocket and pressed something on it. I have activated the self-destruct system. If it wasn't for your impulse, Anne, I would have even called you to my new project. But you and your companions were unlucky enough to be here, and that means it's already decided for you. At the last words, the old man and his guard stepped back, leaving the room. And then the red light flashed again, and the heavy-duty glass doors closed. No. Emma rushed at them, pounding her fists. You wouldn't dare. No worry. Eric bowed his head. And I'm so sorry for your loss. You have about 15 minutes left. After the entire science complex and the building itself will be destroyed. My specialists have designed everything to eliminate the facility as powerfully and quickly as possible. None of you will feel a thing. And now, I think I'll take my leave. After all, I still have time for a weekend away, and I'm in Monaco for a round of golf with some old friends. 15 minutes to complete destruction of Project Hydra. Beginning countdown, the security system announced in an electronic female voice. Eric Franz and his men disappeared around the corner of the corridor, and Anne turned to the small company in shock. Hey, what's going on? Wesley spread his hands. Did that asshole just lock us in here? Are we just going to die in here like this? There's no way. Come on, get away from me. Michael went to the glass wall, pushed Anne away from him, and picked up an iron chair and threw it at the transparent barrier with all his might. And nothing happened. It didn't even crack. And then, for a few minutes, the room was in chaos. Everyone was rushing around, shouting that what was happening was impossible and demanding each other to do something about the situation. and even trying to call the 911 service. Everyone, except for Katya, the girl was sitting on the floor with her back against one of the cabinets, wrapping her arms around her knees and resting her forehead against them. 10 minutes and 30 seconds to complete destruction of Project Hydra once again announced the inevitable in an electronic female voice. "That's the ventilation system, isn't it?" Katie suddenly asked, jabbing her finger at the sea. Everyone fell silent and stared at her. "Well, yes," Anne nodded. "It goes through the whole building," she continued. And theoretically, she explained that maybe the vents and shafts were big enough for a person to squeeze through them as well. "You're a genius," Anne exclaimed and jumped up to Katie and hugged her with joy. "I've seen this in movies." "That's a great idea," Wesley said. "You know, in the cool action movies when the main characters need to infiltrate a secret facility and they climb into the vent. We should check the grate. What if it's welded shut?" Michael climbed up on the table, put a chair on it, and reaching to the grate, started pulling it. And it came off. The ventilation shaft opened. "I'll go first," Michael said, and reached up and grabbed the edge of the grate and climbed in. He disappeared and rustled around inside, and then his voice came out, all clear. "Get in here." Katie climbed into the shaft next. Then Wesley, "Oh, are you crazy? Get in here now." He yelled at his sister. "Now." She replied, frantically gathering and scattering some papers and small objects in her pockets. "Just a minute." "Not a minute." Hurried her brother. "What are you doing?" "I'm collecting evidence to show that bastard." Anne snarled, but then finally went down the It really could fit a man, though men had to keep rubbing their shoulders against the walls. "I think I'm claustrophobic," Wesley muttered. "We're going to get lost." No one answered him, but everyone was thinking the same thing, that they had no ventilation plan and theoretically they could just wander around here for a very long time. Until the end, but so far the shaft led simply forward, sometimes turning but with no branch. And then suddenly ahead. "I think that's the exit," Michael shouted. "The grate won't budge." "Try again, harder." Anne urged him on. "Time's running out." "No, don't you think I know?" EA snarled, pulling hard on the barrier behind which he could see the night sky and the freedom outside the lab. "Hey baby," Wesley said to Katie. "If we get out of here, do you want to go to the prom with me? You got the time." Katie snorted. She found it funny though, of course it was the worst time for humor in that kind of talk. "How old are you?" 23. "I'm not that old. So how are you?" "I'll think about it." "Hey baby," Wesley continued. "If we get out of here, can I kiss you? You're the prettiest thing I've ever seen." "If I can hear you," growled Michael from his seat at the head of the little group. "Don't touch my sister." "Actually," Katie said, embarrassed, "I've never kissed anyone before. But if I'm going to risk dying a virgin, all right, you can kiss me if we get out of here." "Wesley, I'll break your neck." Supported Michael's protest with Anne. "Sometimes I think you're adopted. My brother can't be that." An electronic female voice announced that there were 2 minutes left until the HIDPA was destroyed, and then the grate gave way. She fell out. A little more time passed, and everyone got out of the building. Luckily, it was the first floor, and they didn't have to jump high. "Oh, come on," Michael shouted, and they all ran away. Katie, of course, couldn't run. Wesley just picked her up in his arms. "Now," he said, panting, "I don't want to see a spectacular flash behind me like in the movies." And that's exactly what happened in the next instant. Katie shrieked and squeezed her eyes shut. The shockwave made her duck, almost fall. But luckily they had already crossed the yard and were outside the gate. She hurt her elbow when she and Wesley hit the pavement, but she didn't notice the pain, absorbed in what was happening behind her. It was like a volcanic eruption. The huge and sturdy building was now just a pile of smoking rubble. They lost track of time. They just sat there in the middle of the night and the sudden rain. The weather had suddenly turned bad, and looked at the place they had miraculously escaped from. Now it seemed unreal. And at the same time it was realized as a part of life, which was almost cut short. And then suddenly they heard sirens. "Ooh, cool." Wesley laughed. Like those bad movies from the 90s. Seen those? When the police and firemen and all the others show up at the end. when they're least needed. It turned out that it was indeed the firemen. The residents of the nearby houses were naturally awakened in the night by the nightmarish sounds and the sight from afar and called them. An ambulance also arrived, and from that moment events took an altogether disturbing, confusing, somehow unbelievable turn. And when the doctors began to ask how Kathy was feeling, began to explain to them that in fact, the girl had a new and unstudied drug in her body, so she should be sent to a clinic with the latest equipment to monitor her condition. The doctors didn't even believe her at first. But then, when they realized it was serious, the police had questions too. "We need protection," Michael suggested, and his new acquaintance and sister agreed that was reasonable. "Now that we've survived, I guess we have some serious enemies now." Anne demanded a meeting with the detectives. She didn't know who exactly to contact, but she demanded the most important and the highest authority. She had serious evidence for Eric Franz to be brought to justice for everything he had done as soon as possible, and for starters, and at a minimum, arrested. But just the next day, it turned out that this man wasn't in the country or in abroad, where he was supposed to be vacationing. He was also gone in general, as if he had— "I don't like it," said Anne. A man like that can't just disappear like that. It looks— "But the authorities have already started an investigation," Wesley said when they all met. "They can't just leave it like that. It could just go away." "Believe me," Michael said grimly. "I know it happens. After all, Eric Franz wasn't the only one there. There were other people with money and connections, and they'll probably do everything they can to get away with it." Kathy spent the next few days in one of the best clinics in the state. The doctors examined her and really noticed strong changes in her body, compared to the indicators that characterized the girl's body before the specific intervention. "Hi," Anne said when she stopped by Kathy's house one morning. "How are you? It's terrible outside the clinic. A lot of journalists want to talk to you. It seems that we are no longer in control of the situation." It was like that. Somehow the press got wind of what had happened at the lab, that one of the owners of Project Hydra wanted to destroy it. She had also learned that one of the experimental drugs had been administered in violation of all the rules to a human being. Kathy was worried that Anne would now be charged, and in principle, it should have been. But her lawyer found a loophole in the law. She could stay free due to the fact that she was willing to testify against Eric Franz. Journalists think that after everything you can become something like a superhero, well, or that you grow wings and a tail, joked Anne. "How am I supposed to live now?" Sighed the girl. "How am I supposed to go to school?" "You've already passed all your exams, haven't you?" "Well, yes," Katie shrugged her shoulders. "But I have my graduation in 2 weeks. Do you want to go to it after everything that's happened?" "Actually, graduation is a big deal in a girl's life." "I understand," Anne smiled. "I still remember mine. And why not? You're almost completely healthy now, aren't you?" "Yes," Kathy nodded. "You know, it's strange. I used to think that's what I wanted more than anything in the world. To be healthy. And don't get me wrong, I'm happy to be well, but I'm at a loss. It's like I don't know what to do with all of this now. I guess just live." Anne took Kathy's hand and gave it a reassuring squeeze. "You can have fun, run a marathon, learn to tap dance. And for starters, of course, go to the prom." "Do they pay a lot for interviews?" Katie asked. "Why do you ask?" No. You don't want to talk to the press. Believe me, if you let them, then they won't let go of you. If you don't want to run from the paparazzi for the rest of your life, the only option is not to give interviews at all. Then they'll probably back off soon." "Why do you even ask?" "You have," Anne suggested cautiously, "money problems, but your stay in the clinic is absolutely free. I found that out for sure." "You see," Kathy explained sadly, "I was saving my allowance for the prom. I wanted to buy a dress, but my mother— well, Michael, he was already home and she broke my piggy bank and took everything." "Speaking of your mother," Anne coughed awkwardly. Well, you better hear it from me." "What?" Katie asked, already getting a bad feeling. "She's a willing interviewer. She let the press into your house. She's showing your room, and she's even managed to sell some of your things to some psychics who say they can help someone else get better. And she's drinking. Michael didn't want you to find out, But you're being discharged the other day. I think it's better for you to find out now. I guess I should be shocked, Katie said thoughtfully. But somehow I'm not surprised. My mother, she's not the person she once was. Maybe things would be different if she agreed to be treated at the clinic. Maybe, Anne agreed. My Uncle Wesley and I were the same way. He got better after the clinic. Alcohol can change a person beyond recognition. I know what you mean. They were silent for a few minutes. And then Anne smiled. Okay, girlfriend, let's keep our heads up, okay? We've got to keep taking care of you. And first of all, you're not coming home. Kathy looked at her confused, and Anne explained that she had rented an apartment for her and Michael. No, it was a gift and she couldn't refuse or she'd be offended. Although it was embarrassing to accept, Kathy also had to admit that, yes, it was impossible to go home now. And when in a few days she was discharged from the hospital, Michael took her to a new apartment. There she spent a few more days without leaving the house. She slept, read, and every day she worked out with Anne, who came and showed her how to do various fitness exercises to improve the mobility of her leg so that she could recover as soon as possible. For the next few days, Kathy also stopped by the school a couple of times, almost sneaking in there though, hiding her face behind large sunglasses and covering her head with the hood of her sweatshirt. She talked to the principal and some of the teachers. They said that, yes, she had passed all her exams and had finalized letters of recommendation that could help her get into college. Pack Anne suddenly informed her one day. Where to? Kathy didn't understand, because she was going to spend the day at home, or at most, to go to the park with Mile and Luna. Yes, the dog had moved into the apartment with them. Surprise, Anne smiled. Actually, I don't really like surprises. No, trust me, you'll love this one. Anne picked up the car and drove Kathy to the mall. So, why are we here? The girl asked confused. Because we need to pick out your prom dress, replied Anne. Kathy was shocked. She protested. No, she said, helping her with housing is one thing, but buying her outfits is another, and she just can't accept it. After all, she doesn't want to go to the prom at all. She didn't have many friends at school, so it's not really necessary. Actually, Michael also gave money. He wants his sister to have the best memories of her high school years, and the prom is a must. Anne could be stubborn and persuasive, and as a result, Kathy agreed. She was still grumbling, though, and she almost didn't leave when she looked at the price tag on one of the dresses. It turned out Anne had taken her to an expensive boutique. Continuing to grumble that it was all too much, Kathy agreed to try on one dress. And then, somehow it all started to go wrong. No, it's not going to fit us. Anne told the consultant with determination and demanded to bring something else. Soon the girls, giggling and enjoying the luxurious choice, were looking through dresses of various styles and colors. Anne urged Kathy to try on outfits with fancy necklines, flying skirts, fancy embroideries. Well, how long will you be in there? Is the zipper stuck? Anne asked impatiently. Or, I think, Katie said from the dressing room. Is that it? That's what? That's the dress you want. With these words, she pulled back the curtain, stepped out, and Anne, the two other girls who were helping with the shopping, couldn't help but sigh in admiration. Kathy looked so beautiful in a silk dress in the style of the Dior models of the 50s, made of sea wave silk and embellished with gold embroidery in the form of bird feathers on the bodice. The sundress was complemented with gold sandals made of many intertwined straps and a clutch purse, also gold, and it was all bought. Katie had never spent so much money on herself at one time in her life. She was still embarrassed by the generosity of her new friend and brother, but she was also happy. So there any news on Kathy? Cindy was approached by one of her maid of honor friends. Why do you keep asking me? Snorted the queen of the school. What are we, best friends? So what if she became a new star? In fact, Cindy was terribly jealous of the school loser, as she nicknamed Katie, but couldn't admit it, of course. Wouldn't it be cool if she came to the prom? Sighed Ralph, who knew he was going to be prom king and wasn't very happy that Cindy was going to be prom queen. Of course she was. She snorted again. That would be hilarious. She'd come here on crutches. Why would our school be at the center of such a scandal? Guys, the girl from Cindy's entourage, Lily, called out to them. Isn't that Katie? Everyone, as if on cue, turned around and opened their mouths. Because in the hall of the school, which was prepared for the graduation, and where everyone had already gathered, suddenly entered a couple, which immediately attracted all the eyes. Katie in a green dress, and with a new hairstyle, light makeup, and most importantly, with a radiant smile, was completely different from that frightened, quiet, fearful girl. Excellent, despised by everyone, and how easy, beautiful was her gait. And she did not come alone. She was led by a gentleman. It was Wesley, who dressed for such an occasion in an elegant suit. However, the boy stayed true to his style. It was a suit in a narrow black and white stripe, complemented with a vintage hat and pointed-toed patent shoes, which made him look like a gangster of the Prohibition era. The headmaster was the first to approach them, as well as Jim. The PE teacher greeted Kathy warmly and said that they were happy on behalf of the whole school that she had come to the prom. The girl introduced her companion to them. There were other people who rushed to exchange a few words with her. Katie. Cindy flew up to her. Well, you're just unrecognized. The blonde didn't change her true attitude towards the one she had always hated, but quickly sensed the change in the situation. Indiana shirts. I owe you an apology, she said, lowering her eyes. I've hurt you so much, but we were basically kids. It was the school atmosphere with its eternal rivalry. But now, maybe you want to sit with me and the girls. She smiled sweetly like boiling molasses. Thank you. But no, replied Katie, who didn't believe the lie. I'm afraid. I'm not your type, she replied, and was gone before Cindy, shocked by the rejection, realized the double meaning of her words, and then they went dancing with Wesley. And it turned out he was a great dancer. It's a magical evening tonight. She smiled as he led her in the dance, gently, delicately, but at the same time with a touch of hidden passion, his arm around her waist. And then came the moment when the prom king and queen were to be announced. They were chosen by the students through anonymous voting. The host of the evening announced Ralph, and he grinned smugly and walked up on stage. Now it's time to find out who becomes queen. Said the host as he opened the envelope. He looked around at those present, and by a vote of the entire school, prom queen. Let's give her a big welcome, Katie Lawrence. What? Cindy exclaimed. That can't be right. There must be some kind of mistake. She was about to rush on stage to claim her crown, but her friends suddenly held her back. Actually, said Lily, it's all right. It's just that when everyone found out what happened to Katie, and before that, you were already losing popularity. Cindy, anyway, I gave my vote to Katie. Oh, and so did we. Said another girl, and everyone nodded. When Katie heard her name announced, she froze. She just couldn't believe it. Come on, go get your crown. Wesley gently nudged her. Yay, it's yours. Katie looked up at the stage. Ralph was smiling there. He was holding a bouquet of scarlet roses to present to the prom queen, and then, again by tradition, the prom king and queen were to kiss. Katie was getting ready to step forward. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out behind her. There was a scream in the hall. She turned around and she saw Eric Franz. The elderly gentleman was standing there, pointing the gun he had previously fired into the air at her. You little bitch, he spat out. This is all because of you. Stay where you are. He shouted at Wesley, who was about to step toward Katie and shield her with him. If it weren't for you, I would have shut down Project Hydra and no one would have known anything. This is all because of you. It's your fault I lost everything. And you're going to pay for everything. He moved his hand, and there was no doubt now. He was aiming for her head. But then, the old man suddenly coughed and blinked a lot. Sir, Katie said softly to him. Sir, please. It wasn't my fault. Oh, yes. You wanted to be healthy, didn't you? I just wanted to be rich, to have the power and the fame, the things I've worked for all my life. But thanks to you and Anne and the others, I've lost it all. And you're going to pay for it, he said, and suddenly he grimaced. Then he raised his hand to his heart, and the next moment he rolled his eyes and collapsed to the floor. Katie rushed over to him. Oh, call an ambulance. Oh, are you out of your mind? Wesley was outraged. He just wanted to shoot you. It doesn't matter, Katie exclaimed. He's having a heart attack. Wesley had to comply. And naturally, the mood at the prom changed. The doctors arrived, along with the police. Eric Franz was taken away. Wow, that was quite a night. Joked the host, whose knees were shaking, but he was back on stage. So, let's welcome our queen and give her her crown. Let's party in honor of our prom king and queen. It was so easy to get up on stage and become the person she had dreamed of being for so long, to become the most popular girl in the school, even if it was just before she left for good. No, Katie said suddenly. She said louder and harder. I don't want that title. I don't want the crown. Then turning around, she took Wesley's arm. Let's get out of here, shall we? Oh, what about me? Ralph called out to her from the stage. Katie, you. She turned around with a sad smile. You were my big mistake, Ralph, that's all. And she and Wesley left. But that didn't mean the evening was ruined. For them, it had just already outside. Katie had changed from her stilettos to comfortable sneakers, and they went for a walk around the evening city. They went to the Ferris wheel, where they sat holding hands and watching the stars light up over the city. They ate hamburgers at a little diner that Wesley had recommended as the best in America, and Katie had to admit that the food was really good. Then they walked along the waterfront. Do you remember what we were talking about when we got out of there, like we were in a third-rate action movie? Wesley asked. I think you wanted to kiss me, she said, turning to face him. And you know what? I don't mind at all. Kiss me. Give me a kiss, my first kiss that I'll never forget. If you let me, I'll give you 1,000 kisses and 1,000,000 happy days, Wesley replied quietly, taking her into his arms. In general, they weren't going to reveal their relationship so quickly to their loved ones. They wanted to get to the bottom of it first. But Anne and Michael were too perceptive. A few days later, the small company was informed that Eric Franz had passed away in the hospital. His corporation continued to exist and was facing a big showdown. However, their lawyers contacted Anne, Kathy, Wesley, and Michael. They made an offer, which they decided not to refuse, namely, a non-disclosure agreement, according to which none of the four had the right to tell the press about what had happened in the laboratory and in general to give comments to journalists about it, in return for a substantial monetary compensation. In general, Katie was not going to talk to journalists without any compensation, but after consulting with Michael, she decided that it was reasonable. After all, now she could pay for her college and her mother treatment in a rehabilitation clinic, and simply with this money, she could literally start a new life. They all could. They all really needed it. 2 years later, a small restaurant opened in a small town on the coast of Mexico. Nothing fancy, nothing Michelin-starred, just delicious home cooking. Its visitors were mostly tourists, as well as locals, mostly. Can I talk to you for a minute? Kathy stepped out onto the veranda where her husband was chatting sweetly with his guests, a family from Germany who had come to Mexico on vacation. Excuse me. Business is calling. Wesley smiled at the guests and followed his wife into the kitchen. Did you order vegetables, as I asked? We're running out of asparagus and lettuce. I'm all done, honey. Don't be nervous, okay? In your condition, he nodded at her tummy, already visible under her dress. Oh, I'm sorry. Katie put her hand to her forehead tiredly. It must be hormonal. In that case, why don't you get some rest? Sit and watch the ocean, and I'll get you a glass of lemonade tea, and trust everything to you. She snorted derisively, but obeyed. They'd bought the place a year ago, shortly after their wedding, and though it had been difficult at times, they'd never regretted it. So far, I don't think I've disappointed you. Wesley winked at her, returning 5 minutes later with a glass of drink fogged with ice cubes inside. By the way, Michael called. Hey, how are they? They're great. They say there's a lot of work to be done, so they'll be late. But they'll be back in time for the birth of their nephew. The thing was that Michael and Anne, married only 6 months ago, were now in Guatemala. Anne was working in a charity organization that provides medical care in remote areas of the country, in remote villages, and Michael was helping her. So far, he had only taken a first aid course, but he planned to start studying to be a doctor in the near future. He had decided to become a surgeon. Luna was there too. It turned out that this dog just hates big cities and loves wildness. Wesley sat down in the chair next to his wife and gently put his arm around her shoulders. Do you feel happy? What an interesting question. Do you think it's so easy to answer? No, they were silent for a while. From the veranda, they had a marvelous view of the ocean where the sun was slowly setting. I think I do. I'm happy. But it's not when everything is sparkling and you're expecting gifts and miracles from life. You know what I mean? It's when it's like you know where you are, who you are. You know why you chose to have these people around you and you're happy with that. And you feel very calm, you know? I think I understand you pretty well. And I can say that I feel the same way. And that means that we are